Wren counts her last 9 berries in a cabin that groans under Arctic wind. 3 years in the frozen wastes have taught her that hope is more dangerous than starvation. She's the Omega who couldn't shift, thrown away by her pack like spoiled meat. Now she's a skeleton wrapped in threadbare furs, surviving on spite and scraps. The blizzard arrives like the end of the world. Through sheets of white death, she hears impossible whimpering. She finds him half dead, a pup no bigger than her forearm, black fur crusted with ice, ribs sharp enough to cut her hands. Touching strays means execution, but Wren stopped caring about laws when her pack stopped seeing her as a person. She carries him inside, feeds him broth she made from boiled leather, wraps him in the only blanket she owns. For 3 weeks, the pup she names Soot becomes her entire world. He eats her food, sleeps in her furs, looks at her like she's not garbage. For the first time since Exile, Wren feels almost alive. Then her door explodes into splinters, and King Bram Blackwood stands in the wreckage with eyes like molten gold and murder in his voice. "Where is my son?" 9 berries. That's what survival looked like on the 3rd day of counting. Wren spread them across the warped plank she called a table, her fingers so numb she couldn't feel the wrinkled skins. 3 years in the frozen wastes had taught her mathematics no academy would recognize. 9 berries divided by 7 days equals death, just slower. She could stretch them to 10 days if she boiled the leather scraps hanging above her fire pit, but she'd tried that last month and spent 2 days retching nothing but bile. The cabin groaned around her like a dying animal. Wind shrieked through gaps in the timber, carrying ice that felt like broken glass against her skin. She'd stuffed the worst holes with moss and mud, but the wastes didn't care about her repairs. The wastes didn't care about anything except proving that exile was just execution with extra steps. She wrapped another layer of threadbare fur around her shoulders, rabbit pelts she'd stitched together with sinew, each one representing a week she'd somehow refused to die. The fire in her crude hearth was down to embers. She had maybe 3 more logs. After that, she'd be burning furniture, then floorboards, then nothing. Wren picked up 1 berry and placed it in her mouth, letting it sit on her tongue before biting down. The burst of tartness was almost painful after days of eating nothing. She allowed herself 3 seconds to savor it before swallowing and pushing the rest into a wooden bowl she kept covered with a chipped plate. 8 berries now, 2 days closer to the inevitable. She tried not to think about what she'd been before. The memories had teeth, her mother's face when the pack discovered Wren couldn't shift, the whispers that started soft and grew to roars, defective, broken, worthless. The alpha's cold eyes when he pronounced her sentence, his voice echoing through the gathering circle like a death knell. The pack has no place for wolves who cannot run. Except she wasn't a wolf. She was just Wren. Just a girl who'd failed some cosmic test she never understood, and now she was paying for it 1 frozen breath at a time. The blizzard hit near dusk, like the sky had declared war. Wren had survived 2 winters out here by recognizing the signs. The particular quality of silence before a storm, the way the light turned gray-green, the stillness that felt like the world holding its breath. She'd sealed the door with rags, banked the fire, and retreated to her sleeping corner with every fur and blanket she owned piled on top of her. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. Her cabin shook so violently she thought it might simply disintegrate, scattering her into the white oblivion like ash from a dead fire. Snow forced itself through every crack, building small drifts in the corners. The temperature dropped so fast she could see her breath turn to ice crystals in the air. This was the kind of storm that killed. The kind that buried entire settlements and wasn't discovered until spring thaw revealed the corpses. Wren pulled the furs tighter and tried to make herself small. She'd survived worse. She'd survive this. That's what she told herself, the same lie she repeated every night. Then she heard it. At first, she thought it was just the wind playing tricks, creating sounds that almost resembled living things. But it came again, clearer this time, cutting through the storm's fury, a high, thin whimper, desperate, dying. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put. Nothing survived out there. Nothing should be out there. And even if something was, the law was absolute. Touching a stray meant execution. The packs didn't tolerate rogues, didn't tolerate interference, didn't tolerate mercy. She was already exiled, getting caught breaking that law would mean a death far worse than freezing. But the whimpering came again, weaker now, fatting. Wren's hands moved before her mind caught up. She shoved aside the furs and stumbled to the door, her legs cramping from cold. The wind nearly ripped the door off its hinges when she opened it, and the blizzard hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't see 3 feet in front of her face, just endless white chaos. The sound had stopped. "No," she heard herself say, the words stolen by the wind. "No, please." She stepped into the storm, snow immediately plastering her clothes to her skin. The cold was so intense it burned. She swept her arms through the drifts piling against her doorway, her fingers screaming in protest. Then she touched something solid. He was barely bigger than her forearm, a small dark shape almost completely buried. Wren dug frantically, uncovering a pup so tiny and still she thought she was too late. His fur was black as charcoal, crusted with ice. His ribs stood out like prison bars. When she pulled him free, he was stiff and frozen, his body temperature barely distinguishable from the snow around him. She didn't think, she just ran. Back inside, door slammed shut, her entire body shaking so hard she nearly dropped him. The pup didn't move, didn't whimper. She couldn't tell if he was breathing. Wren pressed him against her chest, wrapping them both in every fur she owned. She blew warm air over his tiny muzzle, rubbed his legs, his back, anywhere she could reach. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, please don't do this." Nothing. She stumbled to the fire pit and threw on her last 3 logs, all of them, the ones she'd been rationing, and held the pup as close to the flames as she dared. Heat slowly returned to the cabin. Heat she couldn't afford. Heat that would leave her with nothing when this tiny creature died anyway. But she didn't stop. She melted snow in her only pot and used the warmed water to clean the ice from his fur. She wrapped him in the softest rabbit pelt and tucked him into her sleeping corner. She took 2 of her precious berries, crushed them into pulp, mixed them with water, and tried to get drops of the mixture past his frozen lips. Hours passed. The storm raged. The fire burned. Wren stayed curled around the pup, sharing what little body heat she had, and tried not to think about the execution that awaited if anyone ever found out. Near midnight, she felt it, the smallest movement against her chest, a breath, then another. The pup's eyes didn't open, but his body slowly relaxed from its frozen rigidity. His heartbeat became stronger against her palm. He was fighting. This tiny, dying creature was choosing to fight. "Soot," Wren whispered, looking at his charcoal-dark fur. "I'll call you Soot." The days that followed were the hardest of her life, and that was saying something. Soot needed food she didn't have, water she had to boil from snow, warmth she had to steal from her own survival. She fed him crushed berries mixed with precious broth she made from boiled leather and bone. She wrapped him in furs and kept the fire burning, sacrificing floorboards when the logs ran out. She rationed herself down to almost nothing so he could have more. He was dying slowly. She was dying with him, but he was trying. On the 4th day, he lifted his head. On the 7th, he licked her fingers. On the 10th, he managed to stand on shaking legs. And on the 14th day, 3 weeks after she'd pulled him from the snow, Soot finally opened his eyes, bright gold, impossibly alert, full of something that looked like recognition. He crawled across the furs and pressed his small body against her chest, right over her heart, and made a sound that wasn't quite a whimper or a growl. It was something softer, trusting. For the first time in 3 years, Wren felt something other than cold. She wrapped her skeletal arms around Soot and felt his warmth, his heartbeat, his simple presence. She wasn't alone anymore. Wren closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe surviving was worth it after all. She had no idea that she'd just saved the heir to a throne, or that in 7 days, her door would explode, and her entire world would shatter into something far more terrifying than exile. For now, she just held Soot close and let herself feel warm. The smell hit her first. Ren jolted awake in the pre-dawn darkness, her body responding to something her conscious mind hadn't processed yet. Ozone, sharp and electric, like lightning about to strike. And underneath it, pine, old-growth pine, the kind that didn't exist anywhere near the frozen wastes. The kind that belonged to ancient forests and older power. Soot was already on his feet, his small body rigid, hackles raised. A low growl rumbled from his chest, deeper than anything that should come from a pup his size. "What is it?" Ren whispered, reaching for him, her heart hammered against her ribs. The door exploded. Not opened, not kicked in, exploded. Wood splintered inward in a shower of fragments that peppered the cabin like shrapnel. The frame simply disintegrated, and through the smoking wreckage stepped something that made Ren's lungs forget how to work. He had to duck to fit through the doorway. 7 feet of coiled violence and lethal grace, shoulders broad enough to block out the dawn light behind him. His hair was dark as midnight, pulled back from a face carved from granite and fury. But it was his eyes that pinned her in place, burning gold, lit from within like molten metal, the kind of eyes that belonged to apex predators and ancient gods. Power rolled off him in suffocating waves. It pressed against Ren's skin, invaded her lungs, made her bones ache with the weight of it. This wasn't just an alpha. This was something that made alphas kneel. The man's gaze swept the cabin in a single predatory assessment, dismissing the poverty, the makeshift repairs, everything, until those golden eyes locked onto her. Then he moved. Ren didn't even see him cross the space. One moment he was in the doorway, the next his hand was around her throat, lifting her off her feet and slamming her against the rough timber wall. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. His grip was iron, cutting off most of her airway, and his face was inches from hers, twisted with a rage so pure it was almost beautiful. "Where is he?" The voice was gravel and thunder, shaking the foundations of her cabin. "Where are you hiding the prince you stole?" Ren couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare into those burning eyes and know with absolute certainty that she was about to die. Her fingers scrabbled uselessly at his wrist, like trying to move a mountain. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "I'll ask once more," the man snarled, and this close she could see the gold flecks in his irises weren't just color but actual light, glowing with barely restrained violence. "Where is my son?" His son, Prince. The words filtered through her oxygen-starved brain but made no sense. She tried to speak, to explain, to beg, but only a choked wheeze escaped. Then something black and furious launched itself at the king's leg. Soot hit him like a tiny cannonball, teeth bared, snarling with a ferocity that should have been impossible. He clamped onto the man's calf and pulled, trying to drag him away from Ren with everything his small body could manage. The growl that ripped from his throat was absolutely feral. The king froze. His hand loosened fractionally around Ren's throat, not releasing her, but no longer crushing her windpipe. He stared down at Soot, and something cracked in that granite expression, something that looked like pain. "Valen," the word came out broken, barely a whisper. Soot released his leg and positioned himself between the king and Ren, his small body vibrating with protective fury. He didn't back down, didn't cower. He stood his ground against a creature that could end him with a thought, and the message was crystal clear: "You'll have to go through me." The king released Ren. She collapsed against the wall, gasping, her throat screaming. But the man wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at Soot like he was seeing a ghost. "Valen." He dropped to one knee, and the movement was so sudden, so human, that it shattered the illusion of invincibility. His hand reached out, trembling, actually trembling, toward the pup. "Gods, gods, it's really you." Soot's growl intensified. He pressed back against Ren's legs, refusing to go to the man. I don't understand." The king's voice was raw now, stripped of its thunder. 3 weeks I've searched. The entire kingdom has been looking for you. We found your blood in the eastern woods. The trackers said you were dead. How?" His golden eyes snapped back to Ren, and the rage returned, colder now, more calculated. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing," Ren choked out, her voice barely functional. "I found him in the storm. He was dying." Dying. The king stood, and Wren scrambled backward, her back already against the wall with nowhere to go. My son doesn't just wander into the frozen wastes. My son is a wolf of the royal bloodline, trained since birth. He wouldn't get lost. He wouldn't. He stopped, something clicking behind his eyes. Unless he couldn't find his way back, unless something took his mind. He moved toward her again, and Soot launched himself between them, snapping at his father's hands. Stand down, Valen. The command was pure alpha dominance, the kind that made lesser wolves drop to their bellies. But Soot just snarled harder, his little body shaking with the effort of resisting. Valen, I am your father and your king. Stand down. Soot didn't move. The king stared at his son like he was seeing something impossible. You bonded to her. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in horror. A royal prince bonded to an exile, to an Omega who can't even shift. I can't shift because I'm broken, Wren heard herself say, voice shaking but defiant. And I didn't steal your son, I saved him. Those golden eyes turned back to her, and for the first time she saw something other than rage. Confusion. Suspicion. And beneath it all, a father's desperate hope fighting with a king's paranoia. Saved him from what? I don't know, he was half frozen, barely breathing. I thought he was just a stray pup. I didn't know, her voice cracked. I would never hurt him. I fed him everything I had. I kept him warm. You broke the law. The king's voice was flat now, executioner cold. Touching strays is forbidden. You know the punishment. I know. Wren lifted her chin, meeting those burning eyes even though every instinct screamed to look away. I don't care. He would have died. Silence stretched between them, broken only by Soot's low, continuous growl. The king studied her for a long moment, this skeletal Omega in threadbare furs, this exile who'd chosen a dying pup over her own safety. Something shifted in his expression, too quick to read. You're coming with me? He turned toward the ruined doorway, then paused. Both of you. And if you've done anything to my son beyond what you claim, if you've used dark magic or coercion or any form of manipulation. He looked back over his shoulder, and his eyes were molten gold again. I will make your exile look like mercy. 3 massive wolves materialized in the doorway, their eyes reflecting the dawn light. Guards, enforcers, each one larger than any wolf Wren had ever seen. Take her, the king's command was absolute. Carefully, the pup is protective. As the guards entered, Soot pressed closer to Wren, his small body trembling but unwavering. She reached down and touched his head, feeling the soft fur she'd nursed back to health. It's okay, she whispered, though nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. I'm here. And as the guards surrounded her, and the King Bram Blackwood turned to leave, Wren realized with cold certainty that she'd survived 3 years of exile only to be delivered into something far, far worse. The healer's tent smelled of sage and something bitter that made Wren's eyes water. They'd set it up just outside her cabin, a massive structure of oiled canvas that appeared within minutes of the king's arrival, along with a small army of attendants, guards, and grim-faced officials who looked at Wren like she was a disease they might catch. She sat on a low stool in the corner, wrists bound with iron shackles that were probably unnecessary given she could barely stand. 2 guards flanked her, hands on their weapons. Soot, Prince Valen, she had to remember to call him Prince Valen, pressed against her legs, refusing to move more than a foot away. The healer was ancient, her hair white as the snow outside, her eyes milky with cataracts. But her hands moved with absolute certainty as she examined the pup, running them over his small body, while murmuring words in a language Wren didn't recognize. King Bram stood at the tent's entrance, arms crossed, radiating barely contained violence. He hadn't looked at Wren once since the examination began. She preferred it that way. Well, the king's voice could have frozen fire. The healer straightened slowly, her joints creaking. When she turned to face Bram, her expression was troubled. Your Majesty, the prince is healthy. Underweight, signs of exposure and malnutrition, but recovering. However, she paused, and Wren felt the temperature in the tent drop. There is something else, something I've never seen before. Speak plainly, Miriam. There is a bond, Your Majesty, between the prince and the girl. Silence, then. What kind of bond? A soul bond. The healer's voice was barely above a whisper. The kind that forms between mated pairs or blood family. The king's laugh was sharp and humorless. Impossible. She's not his mate, he's a child, and she's certainly not blood. Nevertheless, Miriam moved to where Wren sat and reached for Soot. The moment her fingers touched his scruff, the pup exploded into snarling fury, snapping at the healer's hands with bared teeth. The old woman jerked back. You see, he will not be separated from her. And watch. She gestured to one of the guards. Hold the girl's arm. Don't hurt her, just restrain. The guard moved forward and gripped Wren's shoulder. Immediately, Soot launched himself at the man's leg, biting with enough force to draw blood through leather armor. The guard yelped and released her. Soot returned to Wren's side, hackles raised, growling like something twice his size. This is not normal protective behavior, Miriam said quietly. This is bonded behavior. Somehow, impossibly, your son has formed a soul bond with this Omega. They are linked. What she feels, he feels, if she dies. He dies, the king finished, his voice hollow. He finally looked at Wren, and the expression on his face was pure hatred. What did you do to him? Nothing. Wren's voice came out stronger than she felt. I told you, I just kept him alive. Soul bonds don't form from proximity. They form from blood ritual or true mate recognition. My son is 5 years old. He cannot have a mate, which means you used blood magic. I don't know any magic. Wren met his eyes, refusing to look away. I don't know anything except how to survive. Then explain this. The king moved forward, and Soot's growls intensified. Explain how an exile, an Omega who can't even shift, managed to bond my son to her in 3 weeks when it should be impossible. I can't, and that was the truth. Wren had no idea what a soul bond even was, let alone how to create one. Maybe you should ask your son. The king's jaw clenched. For a moment, Wren thought he might hit her. Instead, he turned to the healer. Can it be broken? Not without killing them both. The words hung in the air like an execution sentence. King Bram was silent for a long moment, his massive frame rigid. Then, prepare for departure. We return to the capital immediately. Your Majesty, one of his advisors began. Both of them, Bram cut him off. The girl comes with us in chains. The journey took 4 days. Wren spent them in the back of an enclosed wagon, wrists and ankles shackled, with Soot curled in her lap and 2 guards watching her every breath. They fed her twice a day, more food than she'd seen in months, which felt like mockery. They gave her furs to keep warm, which she wrapped around Soot instead. The king rode ahead. She never saw him after they left the wastes. On the second night, when exhaustion finally dragged her toward sleep despite the iron biting into her wrists, the memories came. She's defective. Her mother's voice, flat and final. No anger, just disgust. 3 years past her first shift and nothing, she'll never be Wolf. The pack circle. Dozens of faces staring at her with everything from pity to contempt. Wren stood in the center, 16 years old and shaking, while the Alpha pronounced judgment. We are Wolf, he'd said, his voice carrying across the gathering. It is what defines us, what makes us pack. Without the shift, you are human, and humans have no place among us. Please, her voice had broken on the word. I can learn, I can be useful, I'll do anything. You are broken. The Alpha had looked at her then, and Wren had seen something in his eyes that didn't match his words. Not just disgust. Fear. You will leave at dawn. If you return, you will be executed. This is mercy. Her mother hadn't said goodbye. No one had. Wren jerked awake to find Soot licking her face, whining softly. Tears tracked down her cheeks. She hadn't realized she was crying. It's okay, she whispered, more to herself than to him. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. She was being transported to the capital in chains, accused of using dark magic on the crown prince, bound to him by something she didn't understand. And when they arrived, when the healers and scholars and whatever passed for justice in the royal court examined her and found no evidence of magic because there was no magic, what then? They'd execute her anyway. They'd have to. A broken Omega who'd somehow stolen the prince's soul, who'd broken ancient laws and created an impossible bond. She was a threat just by existing. And when she died, the bond would kill Soot too. Prince Valen, she corrected herself. The pup who'd pressed against her heart and made her feel warm for the first time in 3 years. The child who defended her against his own father. The heir to a throne who was going to die because she'd been stupid enough to show mercy. On the 4th day, the wagon stopped. Voices outside, sharp and commanding. Then the door opened, and light flooded in so bright it hurt. "We've arrived," one of the guards said. His voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either, just resigned. "The capital, Shadowmere." They pulled her out, and Ren got her first look at the seat of King Bram's power. The city sprawled across the horizon like something from a fevered dream. Towers of dark stone reaching toward gray skis, walls that looked thick enough to repel armies, banners bearing the royal crest snapping in the wind. And above it all, perched on the highest hill like a crown of black iron, stood the palace. People lined the streets, hundreds of them, all staring as the royal procession passed. Ren heard the whispers, saw the pointing fingers, felt the weight of their judgment. She kept her eyes down and held Soot closer. The palace gates swallowed them whole. Inside, everything was cold marble and colder eyes. Servants rushed past, guards stood at attention, and the air itself felt heavy with power and ancient law. They led her through corridors that twisted like a maze, downstairs, deeper into the palace's bones. Finally, they stopped at a door, heavy oak reinforced with iron. "Your quarters," the guard said, and Ren almost laughed. Quarters, not a cell, as if gilded prison bars made them any less a cage. They pushed her inside. The room was larger than her entire cabin had been, furnished with a bed that looked softer than clouds, a fireplace already burning, windows overlooking the city. Luxury beyond anything she'd ever imagined. Also, no way out. The windows had bars. The door would lock from the outside. "The king will send for you," the guard said. "Don't try to run." As if she could, chained and bound to a prince who'd die if she took 3 steps in the wrong direction. The door closed, the lock clicked. Ren stood in her gilded cage, arms around Soot, and waited for whatever came next. They came for him at dusk. Ren had spent the day exploring the boundaries of her prison, testing the window bars, examining the door lock, counting the guards' footsteps in the corridor outside. She'd found nothing useful except confirmation that escape was impossible. The room might be beautiful, but it was still a cage. She was standing at the window, watching the city lights begin to flicker on below, when she heard the door unlock. 4 guards entered, led by a woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. "The prince is to be moved to the royal nursery. Step away from him." Ren's arms tightened around Soot instinctively. "No." That wasn't a request. The woman's hand moved to the sword at her hip. "The prince belongs with his family, not with an exile under suspicion of dark magic. Step away, or we will move you by force." Through the bond, that invisible thread connecting her to Soot that she was only beginning to understand, Ren felt his sudden spike of fear. It hit her like a blade between the ribs, sharp and visceral. "You're scaring him," Ren said, her voice shaking. "We're protecting him. From you." The woman gestured, and 2 guards moved forward. Soot's fear exploded into panic. Ren gasped as it crashed through her, making her knees buckle. She felt his terror as if it were her own, the overwhelming certainty of abandonment, the primal need to stay close to the one who'd kept him safe. It was drowning her. The guards grabbed her arms, hauling her backward. Another reached for Soot. The pup erupted. He bit and clawed with absolute savagery, drawing blood from the guard's hand before they managed to wrap him in a thick blanket. His howls pierced the air, high, desperate, terrified. Through the bond, Ren felt every second of his anguish like knives carving into her chest. "Stop," she choked out. "Please, you're hurting him." "We're not touching him," the silver-haired woman said coldly. "Whatever you've done to bind him to you, it's unnatural. The healers will break it." They carried Soot toward the door, and his howls turned to something worse, sharp, broken whimpers that sounded like a child crying. Because he was a child. 5 years old and trapped in wolf form, being torn away from the only person who made him feel safe. The bond stretched between them like a living thing. Ren felt it pull taut, felt it begin to fray. The pain was excruciating. "Please," she whispered, but the door was already closing. The lock clicked. And she was alone. Ren collapsed to her knees, arms wrapped around herself, and felt Soot's terror hammer through her in waves. She could sense him moving away, deeper into the palace, and every step increased the pain. Her chest felt like it was being split open. Her heart raced so fast she thought it might explode. She didn't know how long she stayed there, drowning in someone else's fear. Minutes, hours, time lost meaning under the assault. Eventually, the terror faded to a dull, throbbing ache. Exhaustion, maybe, or resignation. Ren wasn't sure which was worse. The whispers started the next morning. Servants came to bring her food, far more than one person could eat, arranged on silver platters like she was an honored guest rather than a prisoner. But she heard them talking in the corridor, their voices carrying through the heavy door. Ragged thing, barely more than bones. How did she even get close to the prince? Someone must have helped her. Dark magic, has to be. How else would a broken Omega bewitch the air? Heard she can't even shift. What was she doing in the wastes? Exile probably, criminal most like. The king should just execute her and be done with it. Ren pushed the food away untouched. The bond still ached, a constant reminder of Soot's distress somewhere in the palace. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to send something, comfort, reassurance, anything, through that invisible thread, but she had no idea if it worked. The sun moved across the sky. No one came. Evening brought a visitor. He was beautiful in the way poisonous things are beautiful, tall and elegant, with hair like spun gold and features so perfectly symmetrical they didn't look quite real. His clothes were immaculate, deep blue velvet trimmed with silver thread, rings glittering on his fingers. When he smiled, it was warm and welcoming and utterly false. "My dear girl," he said, settling into the chair across from where Ren sat on the bed. "I am Lord Carrick Blackwood, the king's cousin and first advisor. I thought we should speak before things become complicated." Ren said nothing. She'd learned in the wastes that silence was sometimes safer than words. "You've caused quite a stir at court." Carrick's smile never wavered. "The ragged Omega who bewitched the crown prince. It's all anyone can talk about. Such a romantic story in its way. The lost prince, the mysterious rescuer, the impossible bond." He leaned forward slightly. "Of course, we both know it's not romance. It's something far darker." "I didn't do anything to him." "Oh, I believe you believe that." His tone was gentle, understanding, the kind of false sympathy that made Ren's skin crawl. "But facts are facts, my dear. Soul bonds don't simply appear. They require ritual, blood magic, the kind of dark arts that are forbidden for very good reasons." He paused, studying her face. "The kind that carry a death sentence." Through the bond, Ren felt Soot's distress spike suddenly. Someone was trying to feed him, maybe, or examining him again. The pain made her flinch. Carrick noticed. His smile widened. "You feel it, don't you? His discomfort. That's the bond at work. Quite remarkable, really. Also quite convenient for you. We can't simply execute you without killing the prince as well. A thorny problem." "What do you want?" "Honesty." He spread his hands as if offering a gift. "Confess to using dark magic. Tell us how you did it. Give us the ritual, and I will personally ensure your death is quick and painless. We can even break the bond first, spare the prince any suffering." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "The alternative is unpleasant, torture most likely, the kind that takes weeks. And at the end of it, you'll confess anyway. They always do. But by then, the prince will have suffered everything you suffered through that convenient little bond of yours." Ren stared at him, her mind racing. He was too smooth, too prepared. This wasn't an interrogation, it was a performance. "You want me to confess to something I didn't do?" "I want to resolve this situation quickly and cleanly." Carrick stood, brushing invisible dust from his velvet sleeves. "Think about it. You have until tomorrow evening. After that, I'm afraid the decision will be taken out of my hands, and the king's methods are far less gentle than mine." He moved to the door, then paused. "Oh, and the prince, he's not eating. Hasn't stopped crying since we separated you. Just thought you should know." The door closed behind him, and Ren was alone with the weight of his words and Soot's constant, throbbing distress. She lasted until midnight. The pain through the bond had been building all evening. Soot's terror and exhaustion and desperate, childish need bleeding into her until she couldn't think straight. She paced the room like a caged animal, pressing her hands to her chest as if she could physically hold herself together. Then she felt him move. Through the bond, she sensed determination, purpose. He was coming for her. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Soot landed on the floor in a graceless heap, immediately scrambling to his feet and racing toward her. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts, his small body trembling with exhaustion and pain, but his tail wagged frantically as he crashed into her legs. Ren dropped to her knees and gathered him into her arms, and the relief that flooded through the bond was so intense it made her dizzy. He pressed his face into her neck and made sounds that were half whimper, half purr, his whole body shaking. "You crazy, stupid brave," her voice broke. "You jumped from the tower." Through the bond, she felt his absolute certainty, worth it, safe now, together. Footsteps pounded in the corridor. Shouts. The door burst open and guards flooded in, weapons drawn. But they stopped dead at the sight of Prince Valen curled in Ren's arms, both of them bleeding, both of them whole. The silver-haired woman from earlier pushed through. She took one look at the scene, and her expression shifted from anger to something almost like resignation. "Get the king," she said quietly. "Tell him the prince has chosen." As the guards retreated, Ren held Soot closer and felt his heartbeat slow against her chest. Through their bond, she felt his contentment, fierce, unshakable, absolute. He'd broken free. He'd thrown himself from a tower. He'd crashed through bars and glass and every barrier between them. And now, guards or no guards, execution or no execution, he wasn't leaving her side again. King Bram arrived an hour before dawn. Ren heard him coming, the heavy footsteps, the way the guards in the corridor snapped to attention, the weight of his presence pressing against the air itself. She was still on the floor, back against the wall, with Soot asleep in her lap. She'd wrapped him in blankets and cleaned his cuts as best she could, but he was exhausted. The jump from the tower had taken everything he had. The door opened without knocking. The king filled the frame, and even after everything, the sight of him still made Ren's breath catch. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, shadows under those golden eyes, tension carved into every line of his face. He stared at his son, at the broken window, at the blood on the floor. Then his eyes met Ren's, and she saw something she hadn't expected: defeat. "He jumped," Bram said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "From the 4th floor." "Yes." The king crossed the room and knelt beside them, studying Soot's sleeping form. His hand hovered over his son's head, then pulled back as if he'd lost the right to touch him. "He could have died." He would have tried again. Ren's voice was steadier than she felt. "The bond, it's not just connection, it's need. When we're apart, it hurts him, badly." "It hurts you both." Bram's gaze shifted to her, and Ren saw the calculation there, the weighing of options. "I've been speaking with the healers. They say the bond is absolute, unbreakable. If I execute you, I kill my son." "I know." "They also say it shouldn't exist. Soul bonds form between mates or through blood ritual. My son is 5 years old. You're an exile with no training in magic." He leaned forward, and the intensity in his eyes was almost unbearable. "So tell me, Omega, tell me how this happened. And this time I'm going to listen." So Ren told him everything. She started with the blizzard, the worst storm she'd seen in 3 years, the kind that buried the world in white death. She described the sound of whimpering that shouldn't have existed, the decision to open her door despite the law. She told him about finding Soot half frozen in the snow, so small and still she'd thought he was already dead. "He was stiff when I pulled him out," she said, her hand absently stroking Soot's fur. "Not just cold, rigid. His body temperature was barely there. I thought I was too late. Bram's jaw tightened, but he gestured for her to continue. She described the first night, wrapping soot in every fur she owned, burning her last logs, trying desperately to warm him. The way his body slowly relaxed from its frozen state, the impossibly slow heartbeat. But there was something else, Ren said, trying to find the words. He wasn't just frozen, he was wrong, like his body didn't remember how to work. I've seen hypothermia before, seen wolves caught in storms. This was different. Different how? He couldn't shift back. Ren met the king's eyes. For the first week, I thought he was just a pup, too young to shift. But then I started noticing things. The way he'd look at me sometimes, like he understood more than an animal should. The way he'd try to do things, open doors, point at objects, but couldn't make his paws work right, like he was trapped. Bram's expression had gone very still, trapped in wolf form. Yes, and there was the fever. It came in waves, always at night. His body would burn so hot I thought he'd die, then go ice cold an hour later. And his eyes, she paused, remembering. Sometimes they'd focus on nothing, like he was somewhere else entirely, somewhere I couldn't reach. Loss of consciousness, Bram said quietly, or loss of self. I didn't know what it was. I just kept him warm and fed him what I could and hoped he'd get better. Ren's voice dropped. He almost didn't. There were nights I thought I'd wake up and he'd be gone, but he fought. Every day he got a little stronger, a little more present. The king was silent for a long moment, his golden eyes distant. Then he stood abruptly and strode to the door. Thuron, get in here, now. An older man entered, thin and severe, with gray hair and spectacles perched on his nose. He wore the dark robes of a royal physician, and he looked at Soot with the intense focus of someone accustomed to solving puzzles. Describe the symptoms again, Bram commanded. All of them. Ren repeated everything while the physician listened, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was pale. Your Majesty, Thuron said carefully, the forced shift, the loss of human consciousness, the cycling fever and hypothermia, the impossibly slow recovery. He paused. Those are the exact symptoms of silverroot poisoning. The temperature in the room dropped. You're certain? Bram's voice was deadly quiet. I've only seen it once, decades ago. A wolf from the Northern Territories, poisoned during a succession dispute. The toxin forces young wolves into their animal form and slowly erases their human mind. Without intervention, they remain trapped as animals until they die, unable to shift back, unable to remember they were ever human. Thuron looked at Soot, then at Ren. The fact that the prince survived it all is remarkable. Silverroot doesn't grow in the frozen wastes, Bram said. No, Your Majesty, it doesn't grow anywhere near there. Someone would have had to bring it and administer it. The physician's meaning was crystal clear. The silence that followed was suffocating. Assassination. Bram's hands were clenched into fists. Someone poisoned my son. Someone in my own court, or close enough to reach him, used a rare toxin to kill him and make it look like an accident. The hunting trip, Thuron said quietly. He fell ill suddenly. You thought it was something he ate. And by the time we realized something was seriously wrong, he'd shifted and bolted into the woods. Bram's voice was raw. We tracked him for days, found blood, found signs of struggle, assumed he'd been taken by wolves or died of exposure. He looked at Ren, and for the first time, something like gratitude flickered in his eyes. But he made it to the wastes, to her. The question is why he survived, Thuron said. Silverroot poisoning is essentially fatal in children. The toxin is designed to work quickly, force the shift, erase the mind, and within a week, the victim dies of exposure or predation. They become animal enough to be vulnerable, but not animal enough to survive as one. He adjusted his spectacles. Yet the prince lived for 3 weeks and recovered enough to form a bond. That shouldn't be possible. Unless she did something, Bram said, but there was less accusation in his tone now. More question. I didn't do anything special. Ren looked down at Soot, still sleeping peacefully in her lap. I don't know, I wanted him to live, I needed him to live. So she struggled for words. I shared everything with him, my warmth, my food. Even when I was too cold or too hungry, I gave it to him anyway. You shared your life force, Thuron said slowly. Sustained him with your own vitality when his was failing. I don't know what that means. It means you saved him. The physician studied her with new interest, and in doing so, created a bond strong enough to anchor his human consciousness. You literally kept his self alive when the poison was trying to erase it. Bram turned away, his massive shoulders rigid. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Someone in my court tried to murder my son, used poison to force him into animal form and left him to die in the wastes where no one would find him, where there would be no witnesses, no evidence. They didn't account for her, Thuron said. No, Bram looked at Ren, and his expression was complicated. Gratitude, resentment, suspicion, and something that might have been respect all warring for dominance. They didn't. He crossed back to where she sat and dropped into a crouch, bringing himself eye level with her. This close, Ren could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the weight of 3 weeks of grief and rage and desperate searching. I owe you my son's life, he said quietly, but I also have a traitor to find, someone with access to rare poison and opportunity to use it, someone who wanted Valen dead badly enough to risk everything. His golden eyes bored into hers. Which means I need you alive. You're the only thing keeping him stable while we figure out how to counteract whatever the poison did to his mind. You're not going to execute me. Not today. The ghost of dark humor flickered across his face. But you're not free either. You'll stay here under guard until we find who did this. And if I discover you're involved in any way, if this is some elaborate scheme... He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. I'm not involved, Ren said. I didn't even know who he was. I know, Bram stood, and the admission seemed to cost him something. That's the only reason you're still breathing. He moved to the door, then paused. The bond, can you feel where it comes from? The connection. Ren closed her eyes, focusing on that invisible thread linking her to Soot. It's here. She pressed her hand to her chest, just over her heart. Like a cord, it pulls tight when he's distressed, eases when he's calm. And if I asked you to stay near him, to keep him stable while we investigate? I'm not going anywhere, Ren said simply, even if you let me. The king studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. We'll find who did this, and when we do... His eyes flashed gold, and Ren saw the alpha predator beneath the exhausted father. I'm going to make them wish Sylviroot had been their punishment. He left, taking Thuron with him, and Ren was alone again with Soot and the weight of impossible truths. Someone had tried to kill a child, had poisoned the air and dumped him in the wastes to die slowly, trapped and terrified. And somehow, impossibly, Ren had saved him. Now, she just had to survive long enough to help the king find out who wanted him dead. The scholar arrived 3 days later. Summoned from the archives of Old Wolves, a monastery so ancient its founding predated the kingdom itself. Ren heard the whispers about her long before they met. Elder Maris, keeper of bloodline records, the woman who remembered things the world had forgotten. She swept into Ren's room like winter itself, all sharp angles and ice-pale eyes. Her hair was white, but her face was ageless, and she moved with the kind of deliberate grace that spoke of centuries rather than decades. Soot, who'd been dozing in a patch of sunlight, immediately scrambled to his feet and pressed against Ren's legs, growling. Peace, little prince, Maris said, her voice like wind through bare branches. I'm not here to harm either of you. Her gaze fixed on Ren with unnerving intensity. Though I suspect what I'm about to reveal will do damage enough. King Bram stood by the door, arms crossed. He'd barely left the palace since the poisoning revelation, coordinating investigations and interrogating anyone who'd been near Valen during the hunting trip. The exhaustion carved into his face had deepened, but his eyes were sharp. You said you needed to see her in person. Here she is. Indeed. Maris moved closer, circling Ren like a predator assessing prey. Tell me, child, when did your pack exile you? 3 years ago. Ren's voice was steadier than she felt. When I turned 16 and couldn't shift. And what reason did they give? That I was broken, defective, that wolves who can't shift have no place in the pack. Lies, the word cracked like a whip. All of it lies. You were never broken, child. You were awakening. Mari stopped in front of her, those pale eyes boring into Ren's soul. Tell me, when you held the dying prince, when you gave him your warmth and your food and your care, did you feel it? The pull, like something flowing out of you into him. Ren's breath caught. She'd felt exactly that, but she'd never had words for it. Yes, like I was, sharing something, more than just body heat. You were sharing life itself. Mari's turned to Bram. Your Majesty, what I'm about to tell you will sound like myth. I assure you it is not. This girl, she gestured at Ren, is a lifebinder. Silence. Then, that's impossible, Bram said flatly. Lifebinders are extinct, have been for 300 years. So we thought, so we were told to think. Mari's smile was bitter. But bloodlines don't simply vanish, Your Majesty. They hide, they're suppressed, they're killed before they can awaken. She looked back at Ren. Tell me about your parents. My mother was Pac Omega. My father, Ren hesitated. I never knew him. My mother said he died before I was born. Convenient. Mari's began to pace. Lifebinders are born, not made. The bloodline passes through both maternal and paternal lines, but it's recessive. It can skip generations. When it does manifest, it typically awakens around puberty. The signs are unmistakable to those who know what to look for. Failure to shift, unusual empathy with injured or dying wolves, rapid healing of others at the cost of personal vitality, and an almost compulsive need to nurture and protect. Every word was a blade. Ren thought of the injured rabbit she'd kept alive for weeks when she was 14, feeding it by hand while her mother called her foolish. The pack warrior who'd broken his leg during her 15th winter. She'd tended him obsessively until he healed in record time while she'd been bedridden with fever for days. The way she'd always known when pack members were hurt or afraid, feeling their pain like echoes in her chest. The previous alpha, Mari's continued. What was his name? Marcus Ironwood. And how did he look at you when he pronounced exile? Ren's hands clenched into fists. She'd never forgotten that look. Like he was afraid of me. Because he was. Mari's voice was gentle now, almost pitying. Lifebinders haven't been seen in centuries because the last ones were hunted to extinction during the Purge. They were too powerful, you see, too dangerous to the established order. A wolf who can shift is strong, but a lifebinder. She moved to the window, staring out at the city below. A lifebinder can sustain dying wolves, break blood curses, heal wounds that should be fatal, and form soul bonds that make them indispensable. They channel pure life force, not shape-shifting like common wolves, but the fundamental energy that powers all living things. That's why I saved him, Ren whispered. The poison should have killed him. It should have killed him within a week. Instead, you poured your own life force into keeping him alive. You sustained his human consciousness when the Silverroot was trying to erase it. You formed a soul bond so powerful that separating you now would destroy you both. Mari's turned back. You didn't just save the prince, child. You claimed him, marked him as yours to protect. That's what lifebinders do. They choose who lives and who dies. The weight of it crashed over Ren like an avalanche. Every moment of her life suddenly made horrible sense. The way animals had always gravitated toward her. The pack members who'd recovered impossibly fast under her care. The exhaustion that plagued her whenever someone near her was injured. Her mother's tight-lipped silence about her father. The alpha's fear. I was never broken, she said, her voice barely audible. No, you were dangerous. Mari's crossed to her and took her hands. Ren jerked back, but the old scholar held firm. She turned Ren's palms up, studying them. Look, do you see? Ren looked. At first, she saw nothing. Then, in the right light, she glimpsed them. Faint silvery lines running across her palms like circuitry, pulsing almost imperceptibly with her heartbeat. Lifebinder marks, Mari said. They appear fully when you come into your power. When you saved the prince, you awakened completely. She traced one of the lines. These are channels for life force. Through them, you can sense injury, illness, death. Through them, you can heal, or you can kill if you choose to withdraw life rather than give it. I would never. I know, that's what makes you remarkable. Mari's released her hands. Most lifebinders in the old stories were selfish creatures, extending their own lives by draining others. That's why they were purged. But you, she smiled sadly. You nearly starved yourself to save a dying pup you'd never met. That's not the behavior of someone who hoards life. That's the behavior of someone who gives it freely. Bram had been silent throughout, but now he spoke. If she's a lifebinder, what does that mean for my son? For the bond? It means the bond is permanent and absolute. It means she's the only thing keeping the residual poison from destroying what's left of his human mind. And it means, Maurice paused, choosing her words carefully. It means that as long as she lives, so does he. But the reverse is also true. If she dies, the prince dies with her. Not immediately, perhaps, but inevitably. The bond is too strong now. They're tied together. So she's his life support, Bram said flatly. She's his anchor, Maurice corrected. His tether to humanity. Without her, the Silverroot's effects would return. He'd slip back into animal form and lose himself completely. She looked at Wren with something like respect. You've made yourself indispensable to the crown, child, whether you meant to or not. The door burst open, a guard, breathless and wide-eyed. Your Majesty, Lord Carrick requests immediate audience. The council has heard about the girls' condition. They're demanding answers. Bram's expression darkened. Of course they are. Within an hour, the news had spread through the palace like plague. Wren felt it happening, the shift in the way guards looked at her, the hushed conversations that stopped when she passed, the weight of dozens of eyes following her every movement. She was no longer the ragged exile under suspicion. She was the lifebinder, the bloodline that shouldn't exist, the girl who'd bound the crown prince to her and made herself impossible to kill. The whispers were different now. Can heal anything, they say. My grandfather had a lifebinder ancestor, died in the purge. Dangerous. If she can give life, she can take it too. The king can't execute her now. She's too valuable. Imagine having that power at your command. Servants who'd sneered at her before now bowed. Nobles who'd called for her execution now sent gifts. Flowers, jewelry, dresses far too fine for someone in her position. Messages arrived by the dozen. Offers of allegiance, requests for healing, threats disguised as concern. Lord Carrick visited again that evening. His smile was sharper now, more calculated. My dear lifebinder, he said, and the title sounded like an insult. How remarkable. The broken Omega reveals herself to be one of the rarest bloodlines in existence. The king must be thrilled. He thought he was dealing with a criminal, and instead he's acquired a living treasure. I'm not a treasure, Wren kept her voice level. I'm a person. Are you, Carrick tilted his head, or are you a tool, a weapon? The council is very interested in what you can do. Healing the dying, breaking curses, sustaining life itself. Imagine the applications. The power you could wield. The influence. I don't want power. Everyone wants power, dear child. Some are just more honest about it. He moved to the door. The king will protect you now, of course. You're too valuable to risk. But consider this. Protection is just another form of cage. You've gone from exile in the wastes to imprisonment in gold. And everyone will want to control what you can do. He left, and Wren stood in her luxurious cell with soot pressed against her legs, and the silvery marks on her palms pulsing with borrowed heartbeats. She'd spent 3 years believing she was broken, worthless, less than nothing. Now she knew the truth. She'd never been broken. She'd been dangerous all along. And the moment the world learned what she was, she'd become the most valuable prisoner in the kingdom. The first accident happened 2 days after Elder Mari's revelation. A servant named Tam, one of the kitchen staff who'd been questioned about the prince's meals during the hunting trip, fell from the eastern tower. Guards found him at dawn, neck broken, scattered across the courtyard stones like a discarded doll. The official report called it suicide, grief over failing to protect the prince. But Wren heard the whispers. Tam had been asking questions, talking to old staff about who had access to the royal kitchens, making lists. 3 days later, the records room caught fire. Wren watched from her window as black smoke poured from the palace archives. Servants ran with buckets, but the damage was done. According to the master of records, the entire section containing visitor logs and supply inventories from the month of the hunting trip had been destroyed. Just that section, nothing else. Convenient, Wren murmured. Soot pressed against her legs, whining softly. Through their bond, she felt his unease, a child's instinct that something was wrong, even if he couldn't articulate what. King Bram increased the guard presence, assigned investigators, and interrogated half the court. But the accidents continued. A stable master who'd seen someone tampering with the prince's horse developed sudden, violent illness and died within hours. A guard who'd been on duty during the hunting trip disappeared entirely, his rooms found empty, no trace of where he'd gone. The investigation was being systematically dismantled. And then Wren started bleeding. It began with headaches, dull, persistent things that made her skull feel too small. She dismissed them as stress. Then came the nosebleeds, small at first, just drops that she wiped away without thinking. But within a week, they were constant. She'd wake with blood on her pillow, taste copper in her mouth, feel it dripping warm over her lips. The weakness followed. Her legs trembled when she stood. Her hands shook when she tried to eat. The silvery marks on her palms that had glowed faintly with life force began to dim, flickering like dying candles. Through the bond, Soot felt every symptom. He became frantic, refusing to leave her side, whimpering when she swayed or stumbled. His distress fed back into her, creating a vicious cycle of shared suffering. Thuron examined her with increasing alarm. "This isn't natural illness," he said, drawing vials of her blood. "Your symptoms suggest poison, but I can't identify the type. It's not silverroot, this is something else. Something designed to work slowly." "How slowly?" Wren asked, though she already knew the answer from the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Weeks, maybe less if the dosage increases." He looked at Soot, then back at her. "And when you die?" "The bond breaks. The prince loses his anchor." Wren's voice was flat. "Someone's trying to kill us both, just taking their time about it." King Bram assigned her a personal guard, a massive wolf named Kale with scars crossing his face and eyes like flint. He stationed himself outside her door, tasted her food before she ate it, checked every visitor. But the symptoms continued. Whoever was poisoning her had access, had patience, had time. Wren lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Soot slept fitfully against her chest. Her head pounded. Her mouth tasted of blood. And somewhere in her mind, a terrible clarity was forming. She was going to die if she waited for someone else to save her. So she stopped waiting. The next morning, when Kale brought her breakfast, Wren pretended to eat while actually feeding most of it to Soot. The pup seemed healthier than her now. The poison was targeting her specifically, not the bond itself. That was important. It meant the poisoner wanted to sever the connection without immediately killing Valen, probably to buy time before the bond's collapse killed him too. She started paying attention to patterns. Who visited? When? How long they stayed? She noticed that Lord Carrick came by at least once a day, always with that poisoned smile, always asking how she felt. His visits always preceded her worst symptoms. But it couldn't be that simple. Carrick never brought food or drink, never touched her, never got close enough to administer poison directly, which meant he had help, accomplices, people who could access her quarters, her meals, her water. Through the bond, Wren felt Soot stirring. She closed her eyes and focused on that thread connecting them, that silver cord of life force. And for the first time, she tried to reach deeper. "Show me," she thought. "Show me what you remember." At first, nothing. Then fragments, flashes of memory that weren't hers. Running through woods, someone calling his name, turning, a hand offering something sweet, taking it, the world tilting, terror, falling, shifting uncontrollably, the ground cold, voice above him, "The wastes will finish what I started." Face blurred, indistinct, but familiar somehow, then darkness and cold and endless, endless fear. Wren gasped, breaking the connection. Soot whimpered against her, trembling. "I know," she whispered, holding him close. "I know, but we're going to find them, I promise." She began her own investigation, using the one advantage no one expected, her lifebinder senses. Elder Maris had explained that lifebinders could sense injury and illness in others. Wren started testing this, focusing on people who came near her. Servants, guards, nobles. She'd brush past them and feel for wrongness, for sickness, for the telltale signs of poison. Most people were healthy. Some had minor ailments, joint pain, old injuries, common colds. But two people made her lifebinder senses scream. One was herself. The poison in her system blazed like wildfire in her awareness, eating away at her life force from the inside. The other was King Bram. She felt it when he came to check on her progress, to ask if she'd remembered anything useful. As he stood in her doorway, exhausted and haggard, Wren's palms began to burn. The silvery marks pulsed, and suddenly she could see it, threads of sickness winding through him like parasites. Old sickness. Chronic, carefully dosed to be subtle. "Your Majesty," she said slowly, "when did you start having headaches?" Bram frowned. "What?" "Headaches, fatigue, maybe some memory issues, trouble concentrating." His expression shifted to something guarded. "How did you?" "Because you're being poisoned too." The words came out flat, certain. "Not silverroot, something else. Something that's been in your system for months, maybe longer. It's in your blood, your bones, eating away at your judgment, your strength." She met his eyes. "Someone's been killing you slowly, Your Majesty, probably since before Valen was attacked." The silence was deafening. "You're certain?" His voice was deadly quiet. "My lifebinder senses don't lie. I can feel it in you. The same way I feel it in myself, except yours has been there longer. Whoever's doing this." She paused, pieces clicking together. "They wanted you weak, distracted. So when Valen disappeared, you'd be too compromised to investigate effectively. They've been setting this up for months." Bram's hands clenched into fists. "Who?" "I don't know yet, but—" Wren took a breath. "Lord Carrick visits me every day, always asks about my health, always seems particularly interested in how weak I'm getting. And Valen's memory of his attack, the voice he heard, the person who gave him the poison, it felt familiar to him, someone he trusted. Carrick is my cousin, my first advisor. He's been at my side for 20 years. Which makes him the perfect choice." Wren forced herself to stand, despite the way the room swayed. "Who else would have access to your food? Your quarters? Who else would benefit from both you and Valen dying? Who's next in line for the throne if you both die without other heirs?" The color drained from Bram's face. "I need proof," he said finally. "Accusations aren't enough. If I move against Carrick without evidence, I'll tear the court apart. Half the nobles are loyal to him." "Then we find proof." Wren moved to her desk and pulled out parchment. Her hands shook, but she forced them steady. "Valen remembers fragments of his attack. I can help him remember more. And I can test people for poison. My lifebinder senses can detect it. If Carrick's doozing you, he's probably doozing himself with the antidote. That creates a pattern I can trace." "You can barely stand." "I know, which means we don't have much time." She met his eyes. "Whoever's doing this, they're escalating. The accidents, the burning records, poisoning me faster now, they're getting desperate. They're going to make a move soon." Bram studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled a small vial from his pocket and set it on her desk. "Thuron's been working on counteragents. This one neutralizes most common slow-acting poisons. It's not perfect, but it might buy you time." Wren took it with trembling fingers. "And you?" "I'll start taking it too, quietly." He moved to the door, then paused. "If you're right about Carrick, if my own cousin has been trying to murder me and my son for months," his voice went cold, "I will make him beg for the mercy of execution." After he left, Wren drank half the vial and felt the poison's grip ease fractionally. Not gone, just quieter. She had time, not much but some. She spent the rest of the day mapping out what she knew: Carrick's visits, the timing of accidents, the pattern of her symptoms, Valen's fragmented memories, the king's long deterioration. The picture that emerged was damning. Lord Carrick had been systematically dismantling the royal family for months, maybe years, poisoning Bram to weaken his judgment, attacking Valen when the king was compromised, covering his tracks by eliminating anyone who got close to the truth. And now, with Wren threatening to expose him, he was trying to kill her before she could. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated a starving Omega. who'd survived 3 years in the frozen wastes on spite and stubbornness alone. Ren looked down at Soot, who slept fitfully in her lap, and felt the bond pulse between them. They were going to find proof. They were going to expose Carrick. And they were going to survive. She just had to live long enough to do it. The blood moon rose on the 7th day. Ren had heard about the ceremony in whispers. Servants spoke of it with reverence and fear in equal measure. Once a year, when the moon turned crimson in the sky, every wolf pack across the kingdom gathered to reinforce their bonds. It was sacred, ancient, the night when pack law superseded even royal decree. It was also the night when bonds could be challenged, broken, severed permanently. "He's going to move tonight," Ren said, standing at her window and watching the moon climb toward its apex. "Carrick, this is his moment." King Bram stood behind her, arms crossed. Over the past week, since he'd started taking Thuron's counteragent, some of the fog had lifted from his eyes. He looked sharper now, more like the apex predator he was supposed to be. The ceremony requires witnesses. If he tries to sever your bond, he'll have to do it publicly, with justification. He'll claim I used dark magic to create it. Ren turned to face him. He'll say I bewitched Valen, that I'm a threat to the crown. And according to pack law, if the evidence is compelling enough, the ceremony's elder council can rule to break any bond they deem corrupted. Even one between a lifebinder and the crown prince. Especially that one. Elder Maris emerged from the shadows, moving with her usual unsettling silence. Lifebinders were purged during the blood moon ceremonies 3 centuries ago. The precedent exists. If Carrick can convince enough of the council that Ren is dangerous, they'll authorize the severing. And when the bond breaks... "I die," Ren finished. "And Valen loses his anchor. The residual Silverroot takes over and he slips into permanent animal form within days. No heir. Bram is still being slowly poisoned. Within months, maybe weeks, the king dies too. Carrick inherits." The silence was heavy. "We need proof," Bram said. "Real evidence, not suspicions and lifebinder senses. Something that will stand up before the Elder Council and the assembled packs." "I have Valen's memories," Ren offered. "I can try to pull more details." "A child's fragmented memories won't be enough. They'll claim you implanted them." Maris moved to the table where Ren had spread her notes, timelines, patterns, connections. "We need something physical, documents, witnesses, the poison itself." "Carrick's too careful." Ren's hands clenched into fists. "He's been covering his tracks for months. Every witness is dead or missing. Every record is burned. He's not going to leave evidence lying around." "No," Bram said slowly, "but he has to carry the antidote with him. If he's been poisoning me for months, he's been dousing himself with protection. He can't risk exposure." His golden eyes met Ren's. "Can you sense it, the antidote? Would your lifebinder abilities detect it?" Ren thought about the way poison blazed in her awareness, the way she'd felt the sickness in Bram. "Maybe, if I got close enough, but Carrick doesn't let anyone close. He's too paranoid." "He'll be at the ceremony," Maris said. "Everyone will be. It's mandatory for court nobles. And during the bond reinforcement, pack members stand in circles close together. Physical proximity is required." She looked at Ren. "You'll be presented to the council. As a lifebinder, as someone bound to the crown prince, you'll be at the ceremony's center, if Carrick's carrying the antidote." "I can identify it." Ren's heart hammered. "And if I can identify it, Thuron can test it, match it to the poison in my system and Bram's." "It's thin," Bram said, "but it's the best chance we have. If Carrick challenges your bond during the ceremony, and he will, we need to be ready to counter with evidence that he's the real threat." "There's another option," Maris said quietly. "Ren could weaponize her abilities. Lifebinders can withdraw life force as easily as they give it. If she touched Carrick, she could drain him, make him too weak to proceed with his challenge." "That's murder," Ren said flatly. "It's survival." Mari's pale eyes were steady. "I'm not suggesting you kill him, just weaken him enough to disrupt his plans. Give yourselves time to find concrete proof." "No," Ren's voice was firm despite the tremor in her hands. I'm not becoming the monster they already think I am. We find evidence, or we find another way. Bram studied her for a long moment. You're either very brave or very foolish. I survived 3 years in the frozen wastes, Ren said. I'm too stubborn to be either. The ceremony began at moonrise. Ren was dressed in ceremonial robes, white silk that felt like air against her skin, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that predated the kingdom. Her hair had been braided with moonflowers. Her feet were bare. She looked like a sacrifice. She felt like one, too. Soot walked beside her, no longer the small pup she'd found in the snow. He'd grown over the past weeks, fed on royal fare and sustained by their bond. He was still young, still awkward, but there was power in him now. Future strength. When he pressed against her leg, she felt his fear through their connection and his absolute determination to protect her. Stay close, she whispered, no matter what happens. The ceremony grounds were ancient, a stone circle carved into the hillside overlooking the capital. Torches burned around the perimeter, casting dancing shadows. Hundreds of wolves gathered, their eyes reflecting the firelight. Nobles and warriors, servants and scholars, all pressed together in concentric rings around the central dais. And on the dais stood the Elder Council, 5 ancient wolves whose authority superseded even the king's during the blood moon. They wore masks of bone and antler, their faces hidden, their voices carrying the weight of centuries. Lord Carrick stood among the inner circle of nobles, resplendent in crimson and gold. When his eyes met Ren's, he smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who'd cornered his prey. King Bram took his place at the dais's edge, and the ceremony began. The eldest council member raised their hands, and silence fell like a blade. We gather under the blood moon to honor the bonds that make us pack, to strengthen what is true, to sever what is false. Their voice echoed across the stones. Tonight we renew our oaths. Tonight we challenge what must be challenged. Tonight we judge what must be judged. The ritual words rolled over the assembly. One by one, bonded pairs stepped forward to have their connections blessed and reinforced. Mates, siblings, alpha and beta, each bond was tested, examined, approved. Then, the lifebinder will come forward. Ren's legs moved before her mind caught up. Soot walked with her, refusing to be separated. They climbed the dais steps, and suddenly she was standing before the council with hundreds of eyes burning into her back. You claim a bond with the Crown Prince, the eldest said. A soul bond, this is unprecedented. Explain. Ren told the story, finding Valen dying, saving him, the bond forming without intention or ritual. Her voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. When she finished, Lord Carrick stepped forward. Honored council, he said, his voice dripping false concern. I must challenge this bond. The girl admits she cannot shift, she's not true wolf. She was exiled for being broken. And suddenly, conveniently, she forms an unbreakable bond with the Crown Prince. He gestured at Ren. This reeks of dark magic, blood ritual. She has made herself indispensable to the throne through forbidden means. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The prince was poisoned, Bram said, his voice cutting through the whispers. My son nearly died. This woman saved him. Or ensured he would need her to survive, Carrick countered smoothly. What better way to secure her position than to create a bond that makes her unkillable? Kill her, the prince dies, a perfect shield. He turned to the council. I move that the bond be examined for corruption. If it is found to be unnatural, it must be severed, for the safety of the crown. The council conferred in low voices. Then, the examination will proceed. If corruption is found, the bond will be broken. Ren felt the ground drop out from under her. This was it, the moment Carrick had been orchestrating. But as the council member approached to begin the examination, Ren focused her lifebinder senses. The crowd pressed close. Ceremony protocol required proximity. She felt heartbeats, breaths, the pulse of life all around her. And there, sharp and distinct, a pocket of wrongness, not sickness, something else. Chemical, artificial. The antidote. It was in Carrick's inner jacket pocket, she was certain. A small vial, probably protected and hidden. She could feel it blazing in her awareness like a beacon. She caught Bram's eye and gave the smallest nod. His expression didn't change, but she saw him shift position, moving closer to Thuron, who stood in the crowd. The council member placed their hands on Ren's head, and power surged through her, ancient magic probing the bond, testing its origins. It hurt. Gods, it hurt. Like having her soul peeled back and examined layer by layer. Through the bond, Soot whimpered. His distress fed into her, making the pain worse. The bond is genuine, the council member said finally. Formed through life debt and sustained survival, there is no evidence of dark ritual. Relief crashed through Ren, but Carrick wasn't finished. Then examine her, he demanded. She's a lifebinder. That bloodline was purged for using forbidden arts. She must be tested for corruption. That is your right, the eldest said. Lord Carrick, as challenger, you may perform the test yourself. Carrick's smile widened. He climbed the dais steps and moved toward Ren, his hand reaching for her. And Ren realized with cold certainty that the test would be the moment he broke her bond. This was his move, his endgame, and she had seconds to stop it. Carrick's hand was inches from her throat when Ren felt it, a surge of wrong power, ancient and forbidden, gathering in the air like a storm about to break. Wait, she said, her voice cutting through the ceremonial silence. Before you test me, I have a question. Carrick's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. This is not a negotiation, Lifebinder. It's not, Ren held his gaze. I just want to know, how long have you been poisoning the king? The ceremony grounds went deathly still. That's a serious accusation, Carrick said smoothly. Do you have proof? Yes. Ren focused her Lifebinder senses, letting the power flow through her palms. The silvery marks blazed to life, visible to everyone. She pointed directly at his jacket. You're carrying the antidote right now, in your inner pocket. I can feel it from here, the chemical signature, the way it interacts with the poison traces in your own blood. You've been dousing yourself with protection while slowly killing the king and his heir. Carrick's expression flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. Search him, Bram commanded, moving toward the dais. You have no authority here, Carrick snapped. During the blood moon, only the council. He never finished the sentence. His hand shot forward, fingers wreathed in black light, and grabbed Ren's throat. The touch burned like ice, and through it she felt the forbidden magic, a severing spell designed to cut bonds at their root. It tore into her connection with Valen like a blade, and the pain was indescribable. Soot screamed, an actual human-sounding scream from a wolf's throat. And Carrick's true spell activated. The black light exploded outward in a wave that swept across the entire ceremony grounds. It wasn't just targeting Ren's bond, it was targeting all of them. Every pack bond in the circle began to fray, to tear, to sever. Wolves collapsed, clutching their chests. The connection between alpha and pack, between mates, between blood family, all of it unraveling at once. You fool, Carrick snarled, his mask of courtesy finally dropping. You think I needed just your death. I needed chaos. I needed the kingdom's bonds broken. And when the king and his heir fall in the confusion, his grip tightened. I'll be the only one left standing to pick up the pieces. Ren felt her bond with Valen shredding. Felt the prince's consciousness starting to slip away as the Silverroot's poison, no longer held back, began to consume what was left of his human mind. Felt her own life force draining through Carrick's severing touch. She was dying. They were all dying. Unless she stopped waiting for someone else to save her. Ren grabbed Carrick's wrist and let her Lifebinder power explode. The silver-blue light that erupted from her palms was blinding. It wasn't the gentle flow of healing she'd used on Valen. This was raw, primal life force, channeled with every ounce of desperate strength she possessed. It poured into Carrick through their point of contact, and instead of sustaining him, she reversed the flow. She took. Carrick's eyes went wide with shock as his own life force began draining into her. He tried to pull away, but Ren held on with fingers that had survived 3 years of starvation and wouldn't break now. The power flooding through her was intoxicating and terrible. She could feel his heartbeat, his breath, his very existence, and she could snuff it out like a candle. But she didn't. Instead, she channeled that stolen life force outward, into the severed bonds surrounding them. The silver-blue light spread from her body in waves, washing over the ceremony grounds. Where it touched, torn connections began to heal. Wolves gasped as their bonds reformed, stronger than before, reinforced by pure lifebinder power. "Impossible," Carrick choked out, his face going gray. "You can't, you're not strong enough." "I survived the frozen wastes," Wren said, her voice resonating with power that wasn't entirely her own. "I saved your prince when he should have died. I am exactly strong enough." She released him, and Carrick stumbled backward, weakened but alive. That's when his assassins struck. They came from the crowd. 5 wolves Wren had seen around the palace, nobles she'd assumed were loyal to the crown. They shifted mid-leap, massive and deadly, teeth bared and claws extended. 3 went for Bram, 2 went for Valen. Bram met them with the fury of a king betrayed. He shifted in a blur of motion, becoming something that made the attacking wolves look like pups. His wolf form was massive, easily twice the size of the largest assassin, with fur like midnight and eyes that burned gold even in animal form. He caught the first attacker midair, jaws closing around its throat, and threw it aside like a broken toy. The second and third he met with claws and teeth, fighting with a savagery that reminded everyone why he was called the Alpha King. The 2 wolves targeting Valen never reached him. Soot, small, young, barely more than a pup, stood his ground with a growl that vibrated through the bond. And through that bond, Wren felt his desperate need for her power. Without thinking, she opened herself fully to him, letting her lifebinder force flow through their connection. The effect was immediate. Soot's small body blazed with silver-blue light when the assassins lunged. He moved with impossible speed, Wren's power enhancing his natural abilities, making him faster, stronger, more than any pup should be. He darted between their attacks, his small teeth finding vulnerable throats, his channeled power disrupting their movements. Through their bond, Wren felt his fierce joy, his absolute certainty that together they were unstoppable. But maintaining the flow was killing her. Her vision blurred, her legs gave out, and she collapsed to the dais stones. Blood ran from her nose, her ears, the corners of her eyes. She was pouring too much power out, into the bonds, into Valen, into keeping herself alive against the residual poison still in her system. Her body couldn't sustain it. She was burning out. "Wren," Bram's voice human again. She felt his hands on her shoulders. "Stop, you're killing yourself." "Can't," she gasped. The bonds were stable now, but Valen still needed her. The assassins weren't all dead. And Carrick. Carrick was standing at the edge of the dais, chanting in a language that predated the kingdom. Dark magic gathered around him like storm clouds, and Wren realized with horror that the severing spell had just been the opening move. This was the real attack. "He's going to collapse the entire ceremony circle," Elder Maris shouted, appearing at Bram's side. "Everyone inside will die when the bonds implode." "How do I stop it?" Wren demanded. "You can't, it's too powerful. You're already." "How?" Mari's pale eyes met hers. "You'd have to absorb the spell, take all that dark magic into yourself and neutralize it with your own life force. But the amount of power required," she shook her head, "it would kill you instantly." Wren looked at Valen, still blazing with her channeled power, still fighting with everything he had. Looked at Bram, battered but standing, protecting his son with his own body. Looked at the hundreds of wolves in the ceremony circle, their bonds newly healed, their lives dependent on her. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, broken, worthless, discarded. She thought about the woman she'd become, dangerous, powerful, necessary. "Get everyone back," Wren said, climbing to her feet through sheer stubborn will. "Wren, no," Bram started. "I'm already dying from poison. Might as well make it count." She walked toward Carrick, her body leaving a trail of silver-blue light. "Besides, I'm tired of people trying to kill me. Time to return the favor." She stepped into the center of Carrick's spell circle. The dark magic hit her like a tidal wave, centuries of forbidden power designed to tear bonds and shred souls. It poured into her, seeking to destroy everything she was. And Ren opened herself to it. Let it flood through her. Let it try to unmake her. Then she began to burn. Her lifebinder power blazed to its absolute limit. The silver-blue light became white, became blinding, became something that felt like staring into the sun. She took Carrick's dark magic and fed it into her own life force, using herself as a crucible to transform corruption into purity. It was agony. Every cell in her body screamed. She felt herself coming apart at the edges, her very existence starting to fray. But she held on. Through the bond, she felt Valen's terror, his desperate love, his refusal to let her go. That connection became her anchor. He poured his own strength back into her, small and young and stubborn as she was, and together they held against the darkness. Carrick's spell shattered. The dark magic dissolved into silver-blue light that washed across the ceremony grounds one final time, healing, purifying, making whole. And when it faded, Carrick was on his knees, his power spent, his face aged a decade in seconds. "Impossible," he whispered. "You should be dead." "I'm very hard to kill," Ren said. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed. Bram caught her before she hit the stones. Through dimming vision, she saw his face above her, concerned, grateful, afraid. "The vial," she managed. "In his pocket, get it, proof." Bram nodded and gestured. Guards descended on Carrick, stripping him of his jacket. They found the vial of antidote, found other things too, documents, poison vials, evidence of his conspiracy laid out in incriminating detail. "You ruined everything," Carrick snarled at Ren. "You were nothing, an exile, broken refuse. You should have stayed dead in the wastes." "But I didn't," Ren said, her voice was fading. "I survived and I won." The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Valen's wolf form pressing against her side, his warmth and heartbeat steady and certain through their bond. She'd done it, saved them all, exposed Carrick, survived the unsurvivable one more time. Now she just had to wake up. Ren woke to sunlight and the smell of moonflowers. For a moment, she thought she was back in the wastes, that everything, the prince, the king, the ceremony, had been a fever dream born of starvation. But the bed beneath her was too soft, the warmth too complete, and when she opened her eyes, she saw marble ceilings painted with constellations. The palace, she was still in the palace. And she was alive. "You're awake," the voice came from beside the bed. King Bram sat in a chair that looked too small for his massive frame, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "The healers said you might not wake up. You burned through so much life force that your body should have simply stopped." Ren's throat was dry. "How long?" "4 days." He poured water from a pitcher and helped her sit up enough to drink. His hands were surprisingly gentle. "Carrick is in chains. His co-conspirators are being interrogated. The evidence you helped us find, the antidote, the poison traces, the documents, it's damning. He'll be executed at the week's end." "Good." The word came out more vicious than Ren intended, but she didn't take it back. Carrick had tried to murder a child. He deserved whatever came next. "Valen hasn't left your side." Bram gestured to the foot of the bed, where Soot lay curled in a tight ball, watching her with those intelligent gold eyes. "He refused to eat for the first 2 days, wouldn't let anyone near you. The bond," he paused. "When you collapsed, he felt it, thought you were dying. We had to sedate him to keep him from hurting himself." Through the bond, Ren felt Soot's overwhelming relief, his joy at her waking, his bone-deep fear that she'd leave him. She reached down and stroked his fur, and he crawled up the bed to press against her side, whimpering softly. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm okay." But she wasn't, not really. Her body ached in ways she'd never experienced. The silvery marks on her palms were faded, barely visible. When she tried to summon her lifebinder senses, she felt only emptiness, like reaching for a muscle that had been torn. "Thuron says your power will recover," Bram said, reading her expression. "But it will take time. You pushed yourself beyond any known limit. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky, Ren almost laughed. Is that what this is? Silence stretched between them. Then Bram stood and moved to the window, looking out over the capital. I owe you everything. My son's life, my own life, the stability of the kingdom. Without you, Carrick would have succeeded. The royal line would have ended, and he would have taken the throne built on our corpses. You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would have done. No, Bram turned to face her. You did what almost no one would have done. You saved a dying pup when you were starving yourself. You refused to become a weapon when it would have been easier. You nearly burned yourself to ash to save people who'd spent weeks calling you a threat. He crossed back to the bed. You're extraordinary, Ren, and I want you to stay. The words hung in the air like a sentence. Stay, Ren repeated. Here, at court, as Valen's, I don't know what to call it, guardian, second mother. The bond between you is permanent, the healers confirmed it. Even if we wanted to sever it, we can't, not without killing you both. He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time, Ren saw uncertainty in the Alpha King. He needs you, not just because of the bond, but because you're the only one who makes him feel safe, who fought for him when no one else did. And what would I be? Ren's voice was quiet. Your lifebinder, a tool to sustain the throne, a weapon to heal your warriors and break your enemies' curses. Bram's jaw tightened. I would never. You wouldn't mean to. Ren forced herself to sit up fully, despite the way it made her vision swim. But that's what would happen. I've seen how people look at me now. The nobles who sent gifts, the servants who bow, the court members who whisper about what I can do. They don't see a person. They see power they want to control. I would protect you. Protection is just another cage. The words came out sharper than intended. I spent 3 years in the wastes because my pack threw me away for being broken. I survived by staying invisible, by taking up no space, by making myself nothing. And now you're offering me a gilded version of the same thing. A beautiful room, fine clothes, all the food I can eat. But still a cage. Still a place where I exist to serve someone else's purpose. Bram's expression darkened. What are you saying? I'm saying I need to think. Ren looked at Soot, who was watching her with those heartbreaking eyes. I'm saying I don't know if I can be what you need me to be. The king left without another word, and Ren was alone with Valen and the weight of impossible choices. Over the next 2 days, she received visitors. Elder Maris came first, bringing ancient texts about lifebinders. Your power will return, she said, settling into the chair Bram had occupied. But you've changed something fundamental. The way you channeled life force during the ceremony, that hasn't been done in centuries. You've proven lifebinders can be protectors, not just parasites. That matters. Thuron visited to check her vitals and declare her recovery miraculous. You should be dead 3 times over, he said, equal parts admiration and concern. I don't recommend pushing your limits like that again. Even some of the nobles came, offering gratitude and thinly veiled requests for her healing abilities. Ren refused them all politely, but firmly. On the 3rd day, Valen shifted. Ren was sitting by the window when she felt it through the bond, the surge of intention, the gathering of will. She turned to see Soot's form rippling, changing, and then a small boy stood where the pup had been. He was beautiful, dark hair like his father, but with softer features. Golden eyes that held too much knowledge for a 5-year-old. He wore an oversized sleeping robe that someone must have left for this exact moment. Ren, he said, and his voice was small and uncertain and heartbreakingly young. She opened her arms, and he crashed into them, sobbing. I thought you were dead, he cried into her shoulder. I felt you dying and I couldn't stop it, and I thought I'd be alone again and... SHH, Ren held him close, stroking his hair. I'm here, I'm okay. Don't leave. Valen pulled back to look at her with desperate eyes. Please don't leave. Father said you might go back to the wastes, but I don't want you to. I want you to stay. You're my... He struggled for words. You saved me. You're mine, please. And there it was. The impossible choice laid bare by a child who'd already lost too much. When Bram returned that evening, Ren was ready. I'll stay, she said before he could speak, but I have conditions. The king's eyebrows rose. Conditions. I'm not your tool. I'm not your weapon. I'm not here to sustain the powerful or reinforce a system that throws away anyone who doesn't fit. Ren stood, still weak but steady. If I stay, I want the creation of sanctuary laws, legal protections for wolves who can't shift, who are considered broken, who are exiled for being different. I want safe havens established in every territory. I want the packs to stop discarding people like garbage. That would require a complete restructuring of pack law. I know. Ren met his eyes. I'm asking you to break the system that tried to destroy me, to make it so no one else has to survive what I survived just because they're different. Bram was silent for a long moment. Then, the nobles will fight this. The traditional alphas will call it weakness. Then they'll be wrong. Ren's voice was iron. I saved your son. I saved your kingdom. I think I've earned the right to demand you make it better. A slow smile crossed the king's face. You're not asking, you're demanding. Yes. And if I refuse? Then I take Valen and we leave. Find somewhere the bond won't kill us both and build our own sanctuary. It was a bluff. She had no idea if such a place existed, but her voice didn't waver. Bram studied her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. Gods, no wonder you survived the wastes. You're terrifying. Is that a yes? It's a yes. He moved to the window, looking out over his kingdom. I'll propose the sanctuary laws to the council. It won't be easy, it won't be fast, but I'll push it through. You have my word as king. And I want a voice in the process, Ren added. Not just implementation, creation. I know what the broken need because I was one of them. Agreed, Bram turned back. Anything else? I'm not joining your court formally. I'm not a noble or an advisor or a... She gestured vaguely. Whatever you'd call someone in my position, I'm Valen's guardian, his anchor. But I'm also my own person. I eat when I want, sleep when I want, leave the palace when I want. Within reason. Within reason, Bram echoed, amused. You drive a hard bargain for someone who showed up on death's door a month ago. I learned to negotiate in the wastes. You'd be surprised what you can demand when you've got nothing left to lose. 3 weeks later, Ren stood in the throne room as King Bram announced the sanctuary laws to the assembled court. She wore simple clothes, well-made but unpretentious, a compromise between her preferences and court expectations. Valen stood beside her in human form, holding her hand. He'd been shifting more regularly now, growing comfortable in both shapes, though he still slept as a pup curled against her side. The nobles muttered and whispered. Some looked approving, others looked furious. But no one challenged the king directly, not when the lifebinder who'd saved them all stood right there as living proof that broken wolves could be extraordinary. After the announcement, Bram approached them. Well, satisfied. It's a start, Ren said. The real work begins now. Yes, it does. He looked at his son, then at Ren. Thank you for everything. Ren just nodded. Words felt insufficient for what had passed between them, the journey from captor and prisoner to reluctant allies to something that almost resembled trust. That night, as Valen slept peacefully in his pup form and the palace settled into quiet, Ren stood at her window and looked out toward the distant wastes. She'd been nothing. Broken refuse thrown away by her pack. She'd survived on 9 berries and stubbornness, lived in a cabin held together with desperation and spite. Then she'd fed a starving pup because she couldn't stand to let something die alone. And that single act of mercy had shattered a kingdom's chains. She wasn't the ragged exile anymore, wasn't the broken Omega. She was Ren the Lifebinder, guardian of the crown prince, architect of the sanctuary laws, the woman who'd faced down an alpha king and demanded he make the world better. She'd chosen to stay, not because she had to, but because she'd finally found something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. The wastes had taught her how to endure, but Valen had taught her how to live. And tomorrow, she'd start teaching the kingdom how to be worthy of the broken souls it had discarded. Ren smiled, pressed her hand against the glass, and felt the silvery marks on her palms pulse with returning power. She was no longer invisible. No longer nothing. She was dangerous. And she was free. Thank you for joining Wren on her journey from the frozen wastes to the throne room. What started with 9 berries and a dying pup became a story about finding power in what others call broken, and using that power to rebuild rather than destroy. If you enjoyed watching a starving exile become the kingdom's most dangerous force for change, subscribe for more stories where the discarded become legendary, the broken prove unbreakable, and one act of mercy can shatter a world. The next chapter always begins with someone everyone underestimated. Will you be there when they prove everyone wrong? Subscribe now, and I will see you in the next story.